Hey everyone, welcome back to our week on healthcare technology and human experience. In this first video, what I want to do is just sort of set the table for where we're going to be going by putting our healthcare technologies in the context of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. So we're going to deal with how our hunter-gatherer ancestors prevented illnesses and how they treated illnesses and injuries. Okay. We've dealt with diet and movement in here before, so I just want to say something really brief about that. This was not a particular intervention that they were thinking about. They were just living their lives, eating mostly fruits and vegetables, getting more nutrients than we get, not eating things that were empty calories, moving a ton, so burning off those calories. And as a result of those things, they had very little cardiovascular disease, really non-existent cardiovascular disease. Their bodies were in good shape. I don't want to make it sound like this was just paradise, because they had a very high, compared to us, level of infant mortality. It was 20 to 40%. So a lot of children dying young, which our healthcare has advanced tremendously beyond that. But if a child was able to make it to age 15, they had a very good chance of living into their 70s. So once you get past that initial healthcare issue, which I don't want to gloss over, it is a tremendous issue. Their way of taking care of their bodies was basically giving them as long of life as we have, but you could argue a way healthier life, particularly toward the end. We talked about during our week on diet, the population that we have that has that's overweight, that has cardiovascular problems, that has chronic health issues because of the way our lives are structured. Now, we have healthcare to deal with those things, but it would be hard to argue that the quality of life that we end up with if you are on medication, if you are constantly having to go to the doctor, is necessarily better than what our ancestors had, which is going to be a theme that we're going to kind of come back to multiple times, at least in the next few videos. All of our healthcare technology and interventions, you want to think about them as kind of being designed just to get us back to what we had before the agricultural revolution. Again, a big asterisk around infant mortality, but once you get past that, once you are talking about adolescence through adulthood, we're talking about healthy, happy people for the most part, which, as we've discussed over and over here, is not necessarily how you would describe the American population 15 and older. Okay, so diet and movement, really important. The other preventative measure that, I don't want to call it a measure, the other preventative aspect of their lives was the social context that they lived in. So, hunter-gatherer bands, in my intro class I call them packs to kind of emphasize the animal nature of us, but hunter-gatherer bands lived in relatively low population, certainly low population density, low population groups, usually less than 100 people. Those 100 people were not crowded together. I mean, they lived near each other, but all of the high population problems that we have to deal with are things that they just never had to deal with. So low population density means communicable diseases don't get to you, and to the extent that they do, they aren't easily spread throughout a large population. You could be just a few miles from another band, and any kind of disease that they might have is probably never going to get to you because you're outside all the time and you're not necessarily encountering those people, certainly not in close contact. Their nomadic lifestyle also contributed to their health. In addition to just getting a lot of movement, they're not staying in the same place for necessarily long periods of time. Once they've kind of exhausted the food opportunities where they are, they're moving someplace else, which again means there's not time for them to end up in that kind of sedentary lifestyle that we have, where a disease can get in and take root in a population where they were constantly moving. Let me make sure I'm hitting all of the things I wanted to hit. So they're unlikely to have, based on these two, unlikely to have suffered from the array of crowd and lifestyle diseases that that afflict human beings as soon as the agricultural revolution settles us into one place and populations start to grow. That agricultural revolution has been called by some people, I can't remember if I've mentioned this in this class, but it bears mentioning now. Jared Diamond, who's wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel, kind of a Pulitzer Prize winning historian, said the agricultural revolution was by his estimation, the biggest mistake that human beings ever made, because our health and our happiness go down immediately after that. We don't think of it that way. We think of ourselves as becoming civilized. But if you look person per person, health and happiness wise, again, big asterisk on infant mortality, if you look at us compared to them, you have a lot more happiness and a lot better health with a pretty similar longevity lifespan for hunter-gatherers as compared to us agricultural or industrial and post-industrial human beings. Last point in social context, there was no loneliness, and we know that mental health affects physical health. So the idea of suicide, kind of non-existent in hunter-gatherer groups. The idea of loneliness depressing immune system, kind of non-existent. And it's not because we have to think about it differently than the way we think about our lives when we're among people. You're talking about being among people, only people who care about you, only people who are as not stressed out by their lives and not taking it out on you as you are in that situation. So completely different social context, which is also health promoting. Okay, but that said, there were injuries and there were diseases, and you could pick up bacteria in your drinking water, and there were problems too. So let's look at when those things happened, how treatment worked. Because these people were mostly animist, which is a kind of a catch-all phrase for, or a catch-all term for people who believe that just the world was inhabited by spirits. So trees had spirits, creeks had spirits, animals had spirits. Spirits were everywhere, and they could mess you up if you weren't respectful. So if you ended up sick or ended up injured, that would oftentimes be attributed to spirits that you had displeased, or a member of your family or your band had displeased. And so to deal with that, healing ceremonies, because they ascribed so many of their health problems to problems in the spiritual world. In terms of, in addition to that, medicinal plants, because, again, you're not going to a pharmacy, but they used medicinal plants, particularly honey as an antibiotic. I know honey's not a plant, but that was one that showed up in the reading for me when I was researching this. But medicinal plants to deal with wounds also. And they also had orthopedic interventions. People broke bones, they would set bones. They didn't do it, I couldn't do it. I'm not trying to disparage them. They didn't do it as clinically well as our orthopedists do now, but they did do that. Skeletons show signs of fracture and bones being reset, and those people apparently living on, and the group taking care of them. Also things like crutches, so technologies as well there. Okay. The reason that we're putting all of this in context, first of all, is that, like I said earlier, illness and injury impact happiness. They impact your ability to have a fulfilling life. And so how these things get dealt with or prevented in the first place, which we're going to talk about in the next video, are important in terms of not just staying healthy, but having as happy and fulfilling a life as you can. All right. The next video, we're going to start looking at our first theme, which is trade-offs. We will do that with looking at prevention technologies. I'll see you then.